Hello and welcome to another special bonus episode of Damn Interesting Week. This bonus episode was inspired by a phrase from the internet that my meme-addicted children love to say for no reason at all, and that is, hydrate before you dihydrate. Is it stupid? Yes. Does it make me laugh anyway? Yes, it does. So today we're going to bring you a collection of articles from the archives about all different types of beverages. And whether you've got tea or wine or water or even a Red Bull nearby, make sure you slam it while you're listening to this episode, because I would hate to have your dehydration on my conscience. My name is Jennifer Lee Noonan.
I'm Angela Epley.
I'm Spurr-Chen.
I'm Bradley Calhoun.
And these were some damn interesting weeks.
First Link.
All right, this next article comes from the BBC, and it's called The Samurai Who Forever Changed California.
Oh.
So it's a historical profile of this guy named Kanae Nagasawa, who was indeed a literal samurai who emigrated to California in the late 1800s and became the very first permanent Japanese resident in America. And his story is just wild from beginning to end, because first of all, when he left Japan in 1864, it was during the fiercely isolationist Edo period, when traveling outside of Japan for any reason was completely illegal. But a group of 19 young samurai decided they were going to smuggle themselves out of the country in order to study science and technology in the West. Nagasawa was the youngest of the group at just 13 years old, and his real name was actually Isonaga, but he changed it to Nagasawa because he was afraid that the Japanese government would find him. Like, they were very serious about Japanese people not leaving Japan at that time. They also had to cut their hair and give up their swords, which was emotionally and culturally very difficult. But Nagasawa said, quote, "Our education will be our sword." Unfortunately, getting out of Japan was such a huge hurdle in itself. They really didn't have much of a plan after that. They just sort of wandered in a westerly direction until they got to... I know. Until they got to Scotland, where, because they were so young and barely spoke the language and just had no idea what they were doing, they ended up getting sucked into a religious cult called the Brotherhood of the New Life. It was run by this very charismatic guy named Thomas Harris, who basically said, look, you want to get to America? I can help you get to America. All you have to do is come live on my commune in upstate New York and worship me as a god. And that apparently sounded like a good idea to some of them. And I guess it was a good enough deal for them, because Nagasawa ended up living in the commune for the next 12 years. But eventually, the locals in New York got pretty sick of having a cult next door, and Harris decided that they all needed to relocate to California and start a vineyard.
Ah, yep.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you do. And unlike everyone else on the compound, Nagasawa had apparently somehow managed to grow up into a responsible human being, so Harris put him in charge of running the entire vineyard operation by himself, while the rest of them continued to hold their nightly bacchanalia parties.
Wow, indentured servitude much?
Yeah, pretty much. And of course, their neighbors in California weren't very fond of them either. And before long, Harris and the rest of them had all been run out of town, leaving Nagasawa as the sole owner of a very profitable piece of land in Sonoma County, which, if you know your wines, is right up there with Napa Valley as far as the quality of its grapes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this 25-year-old former samurai completely leaned in to his new life and eventually became known as the Wine King. He would travel to neighboring vineyards to share knowledge. He was the first to market California wines in England and the rest of Europe. And he was basically completely instrumental in developing California's wine industry as it stands today. And then, once the shogunate fell in Japan, he was able to get back in touch with some family members and bring them over. And in 1915, he was awarded the Order of the Rising Sun by the Japanese emperor for his worldwide prominence as a businessman. Which is all very nice and cool. Unfortunately, his story does get a little sad at this point, because the U.S. government in the early 1900s was super racist, and California in particular had enacted something called the Alien Land Laws, which just straight up said Asian nationals can't own property. And for those who already did own property at that point, they kind of let it slide. But when Nagasawa died in 1934, the only American citizen in the family was his grandnephew, who wasn't 18 yet. So the government said, well, he's not an adult. We're going to seize the estate, sell it all off. We're done. And then, just to rub salt in the wound, while the family was still fighting the seizure in court, World War II came along, and Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which forced all Japanese Americans into internment camps for the next 4 years. So, after that, it was done. Like, they knew they had no chance of getting the land back. Nagasawa's grandnephew did remain in the area after the war and ultimately had a family and prospered, but he and his younger sister really never talked about the vineyard they'd grown up on or any of their family history. Finally, though, in the late 1970s, the story began to resurface, partly because a Japanese filmmaker was doing a documentary on the original 19 samurai and where they'd all ended up. The vineyard had passed through several owners by then, and the current owner wasn't about to just give it back to his descendants, but they were all at least really eager to know the history, and they even created a little museum dedicated to Nagasawa, including an authentic samurai sword that he had acquired for himself once he was able to return to Japan later in his life. Except in 2017, the whole vineyard, including the museum, was wiped out by a California wildfire.
Okay.
I know, it just keeps going down. The only thing that survived at all was the samurai sword, which now hangs in a much smaller version of the museum, along with some photos that they had made digital copies of before the fire. But if you want to go straight to the source, a larger collection of Nagasawa's items can still be found in Japan at the Satsuma Students Museum, which is dedicated to the escaped samurai. And the city of Santa Rosa did name a community park after him, which is kind of too little too late, I think, if you ask me. But it's something. I mean, they're sort of finally acknowledging this guy who was known as the Wine King. I mean, how cool is that?
I mean, just classic American immigrant entrepreneurial story that just gets co-opted, buried. I'm so glad there was an article surfacing. The Wine King.
Yeah, well, and at the very end, they were talking about, oh, by the way, that's not what this article's about, but you should check out the Potato King and the Garlic King. And they were all Asian immigrants. He was like, the article was like, there's really so much to this. They're all called the something king, and they're great.
Agricultural Eastern Kings, give it up.
Next link.
Next link.
This article comes to us from theguardian.com, and it is titled, A Good Vintage. Science Suggests Appreciation of Wine Grows with Age.
Ooh.
Just as a bottle of wine improves with age, so may our ability to pick out the subtleties of its scent. And this is caused by changes in the composition of our saliva, and how much of it we produce appears to intensify our perception of smoky and peppery aromas in red wine. So this finding could lead to development of wines that are more tailored to specific groups of consumers.
It's old lady wine. They're going to make a special.
Yeah.
I mean, if they come out with a crazy cat lady vintage, I'm going to have to get it just for the label alone.
I mean, I would be amazed if that does not already exist, honestly.
Right.
But maybe they'll target it even more. Yep. So Maria Angeles del Pozo Bayón of the Spanish Research Council's Institute of Food Science and Research in Madrid says that we could diversify winemaking production to make more enjoyable wines based on consumers' physiological factors like the shape of our mouths or the composition of our saliva, which transports and dissolves the aromatic compounds in wine, as well as transforming some of them through the actions of the enzymes it contains. Previous studies had suggested that our saliva becomes less plentiful and more concentrated as we age. So to better understand how such changes might influence people's wine perception, Bayón and her colleagues recruited 11 people between the ages of 18 and 35 and 11 over 55 and trained them to recognize and rate the intensity of aromas in wine. They also took samples of their saliva and assessed how much of it they could produce, as well as its pH, protein content, and the activity of various enzymes.
Wow.
Which, is like half fun, half kind of invasive.
Yeah.
But,
spit in this cup.
Yeah, exactly. And then have some wine. So they were also then tested on their ability to perceive smoky and peppery aromas in red wine. Older individuals were more sensitive to these aromas and rated them more intensely and for a longer time compared with younger drinkers. And these findings fit in with the experience of a professional wine taster. It's not only the age that can affect the perception of particular aromas, but also the content of the taster's last meal, whether or not they have an empty stomach, or if they ate carbs, proteins, acidic, or salty food. As for why older people's saliva might improve their ability to detect these smoky and peppery flavors, Bayón explained that the amount of saliva they produce could affect the dilution of aromatic compounds, with lower volumes resulting in a greater number of aroma molecules being released into the airflow and coming into contact with the smell receptors in our noses as we exhale. So basically, less of it is getting subsumed into the saliva, so to speak.
So, I mean, what this basically is saying that all of those fancy wine pairing rules are actually true because it does affect the flavor of the wine depending on what you're eating.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's going to taste like wine gravy if you
That's
mix it with a bean.
Yeah. But just as cellaring wine for too long can cause it to deteriorate, there may also be a sweet spot for wine appreciation. Other research suggests that people's sense of smell becomes blunted as they progress into their 90s. So if you've been saving a fine vintage and you yourself are approaching a ripe age, it may pay to consume it sooner rather than later.
That's right.
Best to get your booze on now while you're still young.
Yeah, exactly.
That's some good pandemic
Although it
advice, isn't it? Just drink it.
Yeah.
Just drink it now. Drink it now.
Yeah, go ahead. Treat yourself. Especially if you're over 55. Next link.
Next link.
All right, this next one is from the BBC, and it's called Why Is There Taurine in Energy Drinks? And I should say up front, I have never in my life consumed an energy drink, and I am, perhaps unfairly, but nonetheless incredibly judgmental of the entire concept. I cannot fathom why anyone would want to drink them, but it turns out I might have been wrong this entire time, but probably not. So the first energy drink was launched in America, of course, in 1949. It was called Dr. Enough, spelled E-N-U-F, and it was marketed as a healthier alternative to soft drinks with less sugar and added B vitamins. Notably, however, it did not contain taurine, which is now a staple ingredient of energy drinks.
What year was Coca-Cola? Was that not marketed
much
kinda as an
earlier.
energy drink?
No. That was the soft drink that they were basically trying to get people off of, right?
Yeah, well, and the thing is, marketing something as an energy drink versus being what we would think of as an energy drink.
Got it.
I think
okay.
they're basically saying if it doesn't have a bunch of B vitamins, we're not considering it an energy drink.
Right. If it's cocaine, then
Right,
that's not
that's
really
different.
an energy drink. Got it. Okay.
Yes, but to get taurine in the drinks, we have to wait until 1984 when an Austrian marketing executive took a business trip to Thailand and stumbled upon a drink called Krating Daeng. It was sold as a hangover cure, and in addition to the typical caffeine and B vitamins, this non-carbonated drink contained inositol, which is a kind of sugar found in the brain, and taurine. So the Austrian guy teamed up with the Krating Daeng guy, they tweaked the formula a little bit, added some carbonation, and called their new product Red Bull. And it should be noted that Krating Daeng is still sold all over South and East Asia. The name does derive from a large wild bovine that lives in that part of the world, and it has a label that features two Red Bulls charging at each other. So Red Bull is actually a pretty close translation of its parent product. As for why they added taurine to the original drink, no one really knows anymore. But it may have contributed to the name as well because taurine is an amino acid that was first isolated in the 1820s from the bile of European cattle, aka Bos taurus. And as far as amino acids go, taurine is a little unusual. It doesn't build proteins in the body like most amino acids do, but instead plays a key role in the central nervous system, where it regulates the amount of calcium in nerve cells and controls inflammation. Now, in 1980s Thailand, they were mostly relying on anecdotal evidence for this, but in the decades since then, studies have confirmed that taurine does improve people's aerobic and mental performance. And now, just recently, a new study published in Science magazine has found that taurine may have impressive life-extending and health-boosting properties in a variety of mammals.
Oh.
The researchers tested the effects of a daily dose of taurine on middle-aged mice and middle-aged rhesus macaques and found that the animals who received taurine had better functioning muscles, brains, and immune systems, as well as extending their lifespan by 10 to 12%.
Oh.
Which, for a mouse, is a couple of months, and a monkey gets a couple of years. But if the effects hold steady for humans, as the researchers believe they will, you're looking at an extra decade of life.
Yeah.
And, in fact, many people do currently take taurine supplements, generally for bodybuilding purposes, where it's commonly believed that taurine can help control body temperature and reduce muscular fatigue during exercise. The article notes that the lead author of the study would not confirm whether he himself takes taurine supplements because it would be ethically wrong for him to influence others without having the full science yet to back it up.
Okay.
I mean, they're basically, the reason they think it's going to work in humans is because as you get older, your taurine levels diminish. And that's true of all mammals, so it's why they tested it in mice and in monkeys. But humans also start losing the amount of taurine in their bodies as they get older. So they're like, this is a middle-aged supplement. This is not something babies need. This is something people who are old and tired need. However, it should also be noted that the ideal taurine dose in the mice and monkey study was relatively large. And for a human, it would translate into around 6 grams per day, or roughly 6 cans of Red Bull.
Oh,
As the article says, quote, this is not something to be recommended.
right? Ooh.
In addition to nearly 700 milligrams of caffeine, which is enough to cause toxicity in a 150-pound adult, those 6 cans of Red Bull would contain 32 teaspoons of sugar, which is more than 3 times the recommended daily limit. So, long story short, taurine seems like it might be really good for us, but you should absolutely not be relying on energy drinks to get it.
And I'm an F1 fan, so just Red Bull and me, I'm not going to drink it on principle. And for all of you F1 fans out there, you'll get that joke.
I didn't know there was a scandal. Okay.
No, there's not a scandal. They're ruthlessly winning team.
I've got a whole soapbox about how the Red Bull team drips with toxic masculinity at all levels, but that is for another podcast.
I just remember the thing they used to have, I guess in the 90s, there was a flying craft competition.
Oh, the Flugtag.
Yeah, you like went off this ski jump in your vehicle.
It, don't they?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's sponsored by Red Bull anymore.
Oh,
but
okay.
Yeah, Flugtag events, yeah.
People are going to do that whether or not it's been backed by a company, right?
Right. This was a long-standing tradition, and Red Bull's like, all right, we'll sponsor it for a while, and now it seems like a safety concern, so we're out.
Maybe, I don't know. Red Bull sponsors pretty much all of the extreme sports stuff. Like, that's kind of their bag, is like humans doing impossible things in machines.
Right.
Because of taurine.
Yeah, exactly. Of course.
It's very extreme.
All right, next link.
Next
link.
link. All right, we're going to take a departure in topic and time as Literary Hub takes us to a recipe, how trying to find a cure for scurvy led to the gimlet.
I don't actually know what's in a gimlet.
Well,
Please tell me.
and we're going to go straight into it. I will say the gimlet was long my drink of choice, and I used to host these Mad Men viewing parties where we would just make the booziest cocktails, and gimlet was my signature. So, vitamin C, humans, guinea pigs, and some birds, we can't synthesize it, but it is still essential to our survival. So scurvy is the deficiency of vitamin C. It was long the scourge of both far-wandering sailors and location-locked soldiers who didn't have a balanced diet. So the preventative and treatment for scurvy was discovered and rediscovered several times throughout history, with citrus specifically prescribed as early as 1564. Sea captains of lots of different countries understood that citrus prevented or cured scurvy, but their real-world wisdom was continually passed over in favor of some theory that usually fit in with Galenic medicine by physicians on the mainland. Oh, those ivory towers. So they suspected causes of scurvy included maybe an excess of salt in the diet. They thought it might have been copper poisoning, poor ventilation, or moist air, that good old miasma. They thought it might have been even due to dirty clothing, living conditions, lack of potassium, and parasites living on cockroaches, among other things. So scurvy, it sucks. If you have it, this is what's going to happen. You're going to get bleeding and swelling of the gums. Your breath is going to smell terrible. Your teeth and hair is going to fall out. You're going to get skin bruises, weak bones, reopening of old wounds. Hey, you might have hallucinations and blindness in the end. And, you know, because of all of this grossness, the running theory was that scurvy was a disease of putrefaction. People were thought to be rotting on the inside. So the proposed, and this is a word I'm going to struggle with, anti-scorbutics, which are scurvy preventatives or cures, rice, beans, sulfuric acid, vinegar, molasses, cinchona bark, which I think is used to make quinine, opium, mercury, rhubarb, hops, juniper berries, seal carcass oil, something called scurvy grass, and especially gargling with urine, which probably didn't help with that whole foul breath issue.
No.
Other ineffective treatments included purgatives, bleeding, sweating, bathing in animal blood, and surprisingly often, burial of a person up to the neck in sand. What fun!
Jeez.
So a lot of these cures centered on acidity, fermentation, or carbonation under the theory that they prevented putrefaction of the organs. So they did a bunch more studies to kind of find out what was going to work. It seems that citrus continues to outperform, but they don't look at it as a preventative so much as curative. So the British Navy did not implement citrus rations for several decades, even though we kept hitting upon this citrus thing over and over. Captain Cook got the closest, but it was mostly because he had better onboard living conditions on his ship, and he made frequent stops for fresh food. But, his favorite scurvy device was something called Joseph Priestley's soda water creating device with evaporated carrot juice and a poisonous mix of antimony and phosphate of lime. They called it Dr. James's powder, but everybody is missing the fact that it's citrus. Finally, by the 1790s, some Royal Navy ships were officially outfitted with lemon juice as a scurvy preventative. It was served as a daily allowance with spirit, water, and sugar, or in a drink called a negus with fortified wine in place of spirit. So finally, we've identified citrus as the solution. But now we have a new problem: how to preserve the fruit or its juice on board ships already notorious for having spoiled beer and undrinkable water after a few weeks or months. One guy recommends a rob of lemons and oranges reduced over a fire to boil off the water. And this was meant to be rehydrated on board with water or alcohol, but they didn't realize that the heat of boiling actually destroys most of the vitamin C in the juice, and it deteriorates even more after storage at room temperature. Other methods they tried include mixing citrus juice into olive oil, brandy or rum, sometimes with added sugar. The latter would be, correct, a daiquiri, rum, lime, and sugar, if limes had been used rather than oranges and lemons. But surprisingly, limes were not the preferred citrus of the Navy until the mid-1800s. In both medical texts and drink recipes, there was a lot of confusion between lemons and limes. Not only are the names pretty close, but the green color of an unripe lemon looks a whole lot like a lime. And the inability to identify which was which once squeezed. They both kind of are super sour, right? And limes are more acidic than lemons and oranges, but they contain significantly less vitamin C than either one. And the commercially prepared reduced lime juice on board was relatively useless against scurvy. So this caused some physicians to even reverse their opinions about whether the whole citrus thing was effective at all, which is like, no, you got the right thing. But so after failed citrus attempts didn't work, incidents of scurvy started creeping up again. But sea voyages became faster with the introduction of steamships, and so scurvy started to go down again as people were able to get back to land and eat better food. So how do we get to like an actual product? Bringing it back. The Rose family of Leith, Scotland, was in the shipbuilding business and then later in the ship supplying business, but they pivoted again by 1871. The family company was called L. Rose and Company, Lime Juice and Wine Merchants. So what happened was Lachlan Rose knew of the provisioning requirements of the time, which were lime juice and 15% Demerara rum provided in 4-gallon jars. But he didn't feel like sailors were getting the benefits of fresh lime juice. So around 1865, Rose had the idea to create a sweet juice drink for both sailors and the general public, a less medicinal and less boozy preparation than what was used on board. His trick was to employ sulfuric acid in an airtight container to preserve the juice. Then it was sweetened and bottled as Rose's Lime Juice Cordial. The company continued to diversify and they made lime marmalade, promoted gin and lime as a social drink, and the discovery that lime juice could act as a hangover cure, according to the book Limeys. Later, the company produced rum shrub, ginger brandy, and orange quinine wine. Finally, they were acquired in 1957 by Schweppes, makers of tonic water and mineral water, which were both also used medicinally at first. So if you want to know how to make a gimlet, you can buy Rose's Lime Juice Cordial in pretty much any store today. And the ingredient was even immortalized in Raymond Chandler's 1953 book, The Long Goodbye, in which a character states, what they call a gimlet is just some lime or lemon juice and gin with a dash of sugar and bitters. A real gimlet is half gin and half Rose's lime juice and nothing else. It beats martinis hollow.
All right.
As for the name, we don't really know how the gimlet got its name. One theory is that it was named after a captain gimlet, The second is that the drink is named after a small tool to poke holes in casks.
Okay.
Woohoo!
Like, why a small tool? And we're going to call this drink after that. That doesn't, I mean, I accept
the
it.
naming of...
Like, I mean, why do we call a screwdriver a screwdriver? Because we do. I can.
Yeah,
all right.
I don't have much in the name, but I do have much in recommending, if you do imbibe alcohol, Rose's lime juice cordial. It is so good.
Well, maybe
you can
I'll
even
give it
do
a
like
shot.
a limeade with it if you were just to mix it with water or even sparkling water. Okay, I'm thirsty. Never
Yeah,
mind.
I do. I love a good limeade, so I'll give that a shot.
Yeah. Okay, next link.
Next link.
Well, this next article from Mel Magazine asks a very important, but I think under-asked question. When did orange juice become a morning beverage? Like, why? Why do we drink orange juice in the morning?
It's
and
pure sugar.
Right.
Like it's
Yes, that's
supposed
pretty
to be
much
the
it.
worst thing to do in the morning is have anything loaded with sugar because it gets you on that insulin spike and crash roller coaster from the very get-go, and then you're just fighting that the rest of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, but like a lot of other juices have that same issue. Why is it that like the part of this complete breakfast image always has orange juice? You know, you don't ever
and
talk
not
about
apple juice or grape juice, for
Yeah.
God's sake.
So this article goes into it, and basically their conclusion is, of course, it's marketing. Like milk, America produces a lot of oranges domestically. We're actually second in global orange production. And back when in the 1920s and 30s, when they were kind of trying to boost the American economy, they honed in early on these supposed benefits of vitamin C, right? And so like a 1929 Sunkist ad said, Estelle seemed to lack vitality, didn't even make an effort to be entertaining. Hence, she did not attract the men. And then I got sciencey. It said acidosis is the word on almost every modern physician's tongue. And it should be noted that acidosis is not a real diagnosis. It's sort of a imagined idea where the pH of the body is too acidic from too much meat and bread, right? So they were encouraging more fruits and vegetables, which is kind of good. And at the time, of course, they're trying to save money because oranges are cheaper than meat. But if you really want to get into it, there are a ton of foods that have more vitamin C than an orange. The article listed quite a few: guava, pineapple, strawberries, kiwi, mango, papaya, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, kale, bell peppers, and chili peppers, all higher in vitamin C per serving. So, yeah, even as someone who sort of is like, I know that any sort of vitamin promotional thing in a commercial is a lie. Even then, hearing that list, I was like, oh, wow, that's unbelievable that we've sort of...
Cauliflower?
Yeah, all of the sort of cruciferous vegetables so like broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts are all in the same family, and they all have a ton of vitamin C in them. And of course, people don't want to eat broccoli and cauliflower, but they could eat pineapple and strawberries, but America doesn't grow those. And so they kind of honed in on the orange and just said, this is the thing that we're going to get everybody drinking. And ironically, at the time, soldiers overseas did actually have a shortage of vitamin C. But the military, being the military, they said, no, we're not going to ship oranges or orange juice. We're just going to give you little powdered vitamin C packets, and you're going to like it. And that's what they did for a long time. But they found that soldiers wouldn't take them. And still at that point, shipping liquid juice overseas was too heavy and too expensive.
Yeah.
So that's what sort of spurred the research into making juice from concentrate. And the from concentrate process was not actually perfected until 1948. So it didn't come in time to be useful for World War II. But having figured it out, it kind of exploded the market. Because even though, when you actually, again, look at the data, processed, pasteurized, concentrated, reconstituted orange juice ruins a lot of the taste and reduces the vitamin C content.
But it preserves all that sweet, sweet sugar.
That's right. And they found the best way to still keep those vitamin C talking points is basically to add vitamin C back into the orange juice after they've destroyed all the vitamin C with processing. And,
oh, dear Lord.
Yeah. Ultimately, they sort of say, this all explains why we drink orange juice. As for why it's a breakfast food as opposed to another food, they don't really have any ideas. There's some kind of psychological theories, but mostly it's just the sugar. They note that 1 glass of orange juice contains your sugar content for the whole day. So it's not good. You should not be drinking so much fruit juice. And part of, eating oranges is still quite good because the orange has fiber in it. And that both slows the absorption of the glucose. It gives you that full feeling. Fiber's good for you. It's only when you start crushing these things into juices, because a glass of juice is usually like 5 or 6 servings of whole fruit. I mean, if you've ever juiced a lemon, you see how little juice comes out of it and you throw this big chunk of everything else away. And that's true of oranges. It's just a huge, huge waste. And you're jacking yourself up on the sugar juice.
I can't believe this was ever marketed as something to balance the acidity because maybe I just don't understand how biology works, but you would think you'd want something maybe more base to, neutralize that.
Right. Well, and there is some stuff behind that where certain acidic foods react with your stomach acid and leave what's called an alkaline ash. So basically, even though it's acidic, the end result of the chemical reaction in your stomach is a more basic pH. But even that doesn't justify, like, hey, maybe just eat some vegetables, and then you wouldn't have to worry about it.
Oh, my goodness.
So, go have some pineapple if you want.
And opt for the full fruit instead of the juice extraction whenever possible.
That's right. Absolutely. Next link.
Next link.
This article comes to us from mymodernmet.com. It's titled The Fascinating Story of Yalpan, or America's Lost Native Tea Tradition. So in 2020, the United States imported $473 million worth of tea, mostly from Asia. But tea has deep roots in the United States, and those roots began long before the Boston Tea Party. Yalpan was known as casina by the Timucua tribe, and it was later dubbed black drink by the Spanish explorers because of its color. Prior to making important decisions, a special mixture of tea would be ingested in order to ensure that the mind was clear. By the time the English arrived in the United States, Yalpan tea was deeply ingrained in American culture. In fact, archaeologists have found residue of the beloved tea in a cup that dates back to 1050 CE. And this tea wasn't only sought after by indigenous people, it was a hot commodity. Yalpan was exported both to England and France, but was met with a difficult fate, all thanks to a name. When Scottish botanist William Ayton selected a scientific name for Yalpan, he picked one that continues to have an impact on its usage: Ilex vomitoria. While Ilex is the genus of the holly plant, vomitoria is exactly what you think. Vomit. In actuality, there's no evidence that ingesting Yalpan makes one vomit.
Rude!
Still, with the name in place, the damage was done. And there's reason to believe that the name wasn't a simple error on Ayton's part. Ayton was actually the royal gardener, and as such he was connected to Britain's upper echelon. These were the wealthy and elite of the empire, and at the center of the empire was the East India Company. Those connected to the East India Company were likely worried about the North American export that threatened their monopoly on the tea market.
There you go.
To add insult to injury, Yalpan only grew natively in parts of the United States under Spanish and French control. So the British had nothing to gain from its success. And what's more, botanist Carl Linnaeus, who founded the taxonomy we still use today, used the scientific name Ilex casina when referring to Yalpan. Still, in several editions of Ayton's book, the vomit label persists, and eventually the British Empire threw its weight around to stamp out competition for tea, sugar, tobacco, and opium. Luckily, today there are producers who are looking to change the fate of the Yalpan tea and revive this important tradition. At the forefront of the movement is Yazoo Yalpan, which was started when a native Mississippian, Oliver Luckett, returned home and discovered that the decorative holly in his father's backyard was actually tea. Luckett then joined forces with the Yalpan Brothers American Tea Company to honor the heritage of the Mississippi Delta and make more people aware of what they already know. Yalpan is simply a better tea.
I want to try it.
Yalpan holly, right? That's the plant we're talking about?
Yeah, Yalpan holly, or Ilex casina, and it is a very small, almost berry-like plant that just hangs off the stem.
Well, the reason it rang a bell for me is that I'm pretty sure it's a native plant here in Central Texas. It's one that's supposed to be drought resistant, has benefits to wildlife. So if you are really committed to giving this a taste, you could not be better situated to grow one.
All right, well, I'm going to make a gimlet with a Yalpan tea. I'm going to have a flight. I'm going to have a flight of drinks.
Yes.
I'm going to try them all. And then I'm going to finish
interesting drinks. The podcast spinoff. Let's go.
That's right.
Next link.
Next link.
All right, well, in a slightly delayed celebration of the new year, we have this article from Discover magazine called A Brief History of Champagne. And the first major reveal here is that while we all know the little factoid that if it's not from the Champagne region of France, then it's just sparkling wine, in fact, the original champagne wasn't sparkling at all. It had no bubbles. So grapes were originally introduced and planted in the region, which at that point was known as Northern Gaul, by 1st century Romans. But the climate wasn't quite as ideal as it was in Italy. So wine from this region really didn't take off in popularity until the 9th century, when the nearby city of Reims became the official place where French kings were crowned. And even then, no one was really saying, oh, this wine is amazing. It was just where the people were, so that was where they were going to get their wine. By the 13th century, however, travel was a little easier, imports and exports were more of a thing, and the counts of the Champagne region started hosting festivals and fairs, which could sometimes last for up to 6 weeks, specifically for the purpose of drawing in foreign merchants who would hopefully buy some of their wine and take it back with them. And it worked. By the 14th century, most of the land around the city of Reims had been planted with vineyards, and the area was considered a major player in the wine industry. But, like I said, the climate wasn't ideal, and one of the big problems was how cold it gets in the winter in France. Apparently, it was cold enough that the yeast that they used for fermentation would go into hibernation. And then once it warmed up in the spring, they'd go into overdrive, sometimes fermenting so fast that they'd give off carbon dioxide gas.
Oh, no.
This meant, for one thing, that a lot of French wine bottles simply exploded. And for the ones that didn't, a certain percentage of them would contain bubbles, which was at the time considered a failure. It was a bad batch of wine. They had to get rid of it. So the French were always looking for ways to reduce the amount of wine that they lost to explosion and bubbles. And one of the first to really drill down into the problem was a guy named Dom Perignon.
Hey!
He was a French Benedictine monk in the late 1600s, and he innovated a lot of different aspects of the wine industry. He created the champagne press, which reduces the amount of time the grape skins are in contact with the grape juice and thus helps with the wine's clarity. He also implemented the use of cork stoppers instead of wooden ones and began using stronger English glass bottles that were less likely to explode, although a large number of them still definitely exploded anyway. But most importantly, he cultivated a strain of black grapes that produced a very pale white wine, whereas before, wine from that region had always been pink. And he decided, finally, he was going to give up on his bubble tirade. This new white wine should be sparkling, and that the bubbles would be a feature rather than a bug. And once they decided to lean into it, they started really narrowing down the process for getting just the right amount of bubbles. This largely came down to the amount of sugar that the winemakers would add to the wine before closing up the bottles. Too much sugar and the bottles would explode, but not enough, and you'd end up with a flat wine, which they had just decided they didn't want anymore. And for a long time, this was an art rather than a science. But in 1836, a French chemist named Jean-Baptiste Francois created a mathematical scale to determine the exact right amount of sugar. Once his scale went into practice, bottle explosions dropped from 90% to 8%.
Whoa! Science to the rescue.
Exactly. And that's a lot of extra wine to celebrate with. Unfortunately, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the vineyards of Champagne suffered terribly from a blight caused by the phylloxera insect. They had to graft resistant American vines onto their own just to stay in business, and some people claimed that wine from the region never tasted the same after that. They also faced significant losses during World War I and World War II and lost a lot of business due to America's prohibition and the Great Depression. Fortunately, after all that, they bounced back stronger than ever after World War II and successfully lobbied for the right to declare that champagne wasn't unless it was from Champagne. Which is all very exciting. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of champagne. My big takeaway here, honestly, is that monks were really just farmers. You know, Mendel had his peas and Dom Perignon had vineyards. Like, they really seem to be doing a lot more farming than devotional prayers or whatever they were supposed to be doing.
It's specifically innovations in farming. Like, it was the closest you could be to being a sanctioned scientist because, hey, what are you going to do?
True.
Say, I don't believe in God? I'm a monk.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, okay, do you want to be a hard laborer? Or do you want to go live in the nice monastery where, okay, you've got to pray a bunch of times a day, but then you get to be all sciencey and nerdy about it and not have to, I don't know. I agree. I probably would have joined a nunnery just so that I wouldn't have to work in the fields.
Oh, yeah. Or marry someone that you were being forced to marry.
Exactly. Like the one guy who was my age in the village. Nah, I'll go to the nunnery.
Oh, you thought that ages mattered back in marriages back then. That's cute.
Fair point. Absolutely fair point. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for this bonus episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. As always, Damn Interesting Week remains an intentionally ad-free experience. So if you like our podcast and you want to support us, you can do so at patreon.com/damninterestingweek, which is also where you could get episodes a day earlier than everyone else, if that sounds like fun. In the meantime, my name is Jennifer Lee Noonan,
I'm Angela Epley.
I'm Spurr-Chen.
I'm Bradley Calhoun.
and we hope you have a damn interesting week. Bye-bye.